Mpoletu, we are on your farm right now. How did you receive the news, or what do you take of this new law?
There is a lot to discuss when it comes to this law. It is very touching for a lot of the youth because, one, it opens a lot of opportunities and a lot of doors for a lot of us. But at the same time, there is a lot in terms of agriculture on how it really does affect, because the minority in our country, obviously being the white people, are feeding us on a day-to-day basis.
What do you mean when you say feeding us?
In terms of the number of farmers that there are, the white farmers are a very small group, yet the numbers that they're able to achieve in terms of production of food are feeding South Africa and even the Sub-Sahara.
Okay, so let me speak to Tevi here, because you are the white farmer that is being discussed here, right? So for you, how do you take it? Because the government is trying to sell this as a kind of land reform act, and we'll get to the details shortly. But what's your take?
So the main thing to realize is, I believe that property rights and the guaranteed property rights in a country is part of the constitution. And in every country in this world where property rights has been taken from people, that country has started to become a third world country. Now, South Africa is definitely on its way to that, and I believe this could be the last nail in the coffin. So it's very important.
So let me come back to something you've said. You think South Africa is well on its way to becoming a third world country?
Yes, definitely. We can just look at a crime which affects us all. 27,000 murders a year. That is comparable to the third world countries in the world. South Africa is among the top 10 most dangerous countries in the world.
Okay, so coming back to the issue of this expropriation law, I just want to come to you, Bulelwa. How do you see the law?
I think it's important to first set out what the Expropriation Act is not. The Expropriation Act has nothing to do with land reform. Now, what this act introduces is that it's a balancing act between the interests of the public and the interests of the landowner.
Yeah.
So it makes provision for just and equitable compensation, where they look at the history of the acquisition of the property, they look at the state investment, have there been any improvements? And what it does, which I think is what has gotten people in a frenzy, is that it introduces very few instances where expropriation can happen without compensation.
Okay, so before we talk about the compensation issue, Martin here is already shaking his head no. I'm curious to know what exactly you're disagreeing with. Can we agree, first of all, that expropriation has nothing to do with land reform?
This act is not a land reform law, and the difference is that successful countries, Germany, the United States, United Kingdom, Switzerland, South Korea, Japan, etc., all have a very wide degree of deference to owners when expropriating their property. The government says sorry to you by paying you market or above compensation. Now in South Africa, and this is what I was disagreeing about, is that it's not a small list of circumstances in which the government can now seize your property, confiscate your property without paying you a cent. So if you own fixed property anywhere in the country, a house, a business, a warehouse, a farm, and the government says, we think in the public interest we have to take this without paying you a cent, it is allowed to do that. That is inconsistent with the constitution.
Okay, so I want to hear from Una here, because your view is actually quite different. Not only do you believe that expropriation needs to happen, you think it needs to happen across the board without compensation.
Exactly, that's correct, because when you trace the history of South Africa, when you look at the situation of South Africa, my good sir was speaking about crime here. Crime is a result of poverty, and poverty was engineered in South Africa and Africa as a whole. What happened is that in 1652, when the settler arrived here, from that period up until the period of 1910, the land of our people was taken away on grounds that, no, this land is not used. The other one, they said, no, this land is not being used for anything. So they actually expropriated it without compensation. And actually, when they expropriated it, they were using violence. Okay, that was the nature of colonialism. And then our people ended up in a situation whereby they were forced now to go and work. That land, what it did, 67% of the population of South Africa was allocated to only 7% of the land of South Africa.
Let me just bring our global audience into perspective here. The Native Lands Act is what basically was aligned with apartheid. Black and people of color could not own land. And so before we go on so deep into history, you've taken us back to the 17th century. Yes. In that case, shouldn't everybody leave the property to the Khoisan, who are thought to be the native occupants of South Africa?
No, actually, Africa and South Africa, it belongs to the Bantu people. It belongs to the Ngunis. So it belongs to the people of Africa.
What about Teve here?
We are not saying it doesn't belong here. Now that we are living together here, our perspective is that the land must go back to the chiefs, the traditional leaders, and the state. We are unapologetic about this. Land must be expropriated without compensation, because this thing of wasting taxpayers' money, buying land that has been stolen.
Okay, we'll come to those details later. I just want to get your response real quick.
I believe the biggest problem in South Africa currently is the government. And if they expropriate the land in a blanket way, every portion of land, every hectare of land, do you know how many hectares of land currently the government owns in South Africa? Lying bare and wasted. That was bought from white farmers. If the ANC was in any way serious about giving black people land, I have no problem. They should give black people land. They should get black people to farm on that land. And there's a lot of Bophuthatswana, for instance, is 4 million hectares that's lying bare. If they were really serious about empowering black farmers, they would have given them that farm. They would have given them title deeds. But if there is today a blanket expropriation happening, they will still not give you the land.
Okay, I'm hearing Bulelwa behind me here. Are you the one who was muttering?
Yes, he made a statement that there is a blanket expropriation. That is not the case in South Africa. In this new act of 2025, it's more difficult for government to prove that land is expropriated. There are about 7 or 8 stages that the government must prove. So my argument is that there should not be any fear-mongering around the Expropriation Act, because actually the landowners' rights are even more protected than ever before.
Let me hear from Martin, actually, because that's your interpretation. And Martin, you seem to think that the law is actually now contravening the Constitution.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Act says that when the government deems it in the public interest, there are examples, but generally in the public interest, the government may take property without paying anything. This specific government has a long history since the 1990s of depriving people of private property. One cannot look at this Act in isolation. Look at the safeguards, which, of course, they are there, and it's better with them there than not there.
So
but it's not.
You've mentioned safeguards. Do you not trust that they will be upheld?
No. I mean, it comes down to these are formalities. And again, it's better that they are there than they aren't. Okay. But unfortunately, most South Africans, and that includes relatively wealthy South Africans, do not have the money when they've now parted with their property. There goes the minister with their farm or their warehouse. And now they have to pay a lawyer, they have to go to court, and they have to spend sometimes a decade in court fighting the expropriation to get their market-based compensation or any compensation whatsoever. No one can really afford it except the creme de la creme of the 1%, and very few people fit in that bracket.
Okay. Let me speak to Komots here, who is also a farmer. And when you hear, first of all, the conversation that's going on so far, what's your reaction? How do you feel about it?
I'm a farmer. I've been doing that for 5 years commercially, and I operate on leased land for 5 years. So my challenge is, if I've been farming for 5 years commercially with a very good track record, how come I do not have access to land when my neighbor has got 1,000 hectares of land that is just sitting there? So for me, we need to...
Sorry, let's just go back a little bit, because we don't all understand how acquisition of property works in this country. What are the steps?
So for example, I would go and look for a farm that I'm interested in, and to my shock, everything is overly priced. And in my opinion, it's overly priced because the normal guy like me is not supposed to be able to afford to buy that piece of land. So my next logical thing to do was to lease. I've been leasing a land for 5 years. I still can't get finance for land because I need to put up security. I don't have security. My neighbor owns 100 or 1,000 hectares of land, and I'm operating on a leased 3.5 hectare farm. 5 years commercially and successful at that matter. So for me, this whole process makes it easy for people like me to be able to get the foot at the door, because what then happens is it tips the scales. So the play field is not leveled. So for me, this is a process that it might not fix everything, but it will get me into the playing field.
Yeah. Wow, Makone, I want to hear your perspective a little bit, because you are also of the opinion that this is not at all about land reform. So if it's not, what will be?
No, I absolutely agree with Bulelwa and Martin that this is not about land reform. I think that is the issue with the land reform system as it currently stands, is it's deeply cynical about providing black people with land. The government doesn't trust black people with land in this country. And that's evidenced by the millions of title deeds that are held in backlogs by the state. In fact, in November of 2024, the Minister of Human Settlements said that between the years 2029 and 2024, they had the target of clearing 1 million title deeds away from the state, finally into the hands of South Africans. How many of those have been achieved today? Only 100,000, less than 10%. That is what I'm speaking about when I say there's a cynical distrust of giving black people access to land.
Okay.
There is a point of contention.
Just before we continue, let me see by show of hands, do you agree with what Makone is saying? Do you believe, if you believe that the government trusts black people with land, raise your hand. Not a single person.
Look, there is that whole notion of, if I'm going to give you land, are you actually going to use it? I come from an area in Brits. He spoke about Brits. That's my hometown. There was a huge land claim that was done. Yes, land was given to people, but the land is not being used. Why? There's problems like there's no resources. So that you are not given, you can be given 10 hectares of land, but with no resources to use that land, with no help to actually get training to actually go and actually make that land productive, it's actually useless. My dad is one of the people that actually got that land that was claimed. Because he didn't have the resources to use the land, he actually resorted to leasing the land to another person who happens to be a white farmer. You're not going to believe this. A whole 15 hectares for 6,000 rands every 6 months.
So the land was restituted back to your father. He was unable to make it productive, and so he had to rent it out to a white farmer who had the resources.
Yes.
Wow, okay. So let me speak to Tavi again, because as a farmer, I mean, before we even started, you were telling me how you had to deal with your cattle, and these are just farmer problems that I'm familiar with, right? So is it fair for people to characterize you as the wealthy white farmer who gets access to loans? Is that true, first of all?
No, that's not true, first of all. So the main thing I think a lot of people don't realize is if you have a farm, the land, the bank holds your title. 2/3 of that farm is already owned by the bank. And if I have 1 year where harvesting isn't good, like last year, I have to go again, now it's 100%. I don't own nothing. I'm just leasing that land from a bank. And a lot of white farmers that people think are rich are actually not that rich. I know of guys that have the biggest farms, thousands of hectares. And you think, wow, these guys are rich. But they have 200 million worth of debt. And the property is also about 200 million. So that guy is actually dirt poor. So I think people really need to realize that. And Komotso, I want to tell you, well done. That's really difficult to stay on that farm and to continuing. I can just imagine that. But I just want to add something to you. I understand you have the big neighbor with 1,000 hectares. And in my area, I'm not a big farmer as well. I have the same problem, I have to tell you. Whenever I go out and I try to lease a land, one day I dream of buying another piece. The big guys around me is going to check. I have no chance. I have no chance to buy or lease because they are bigger, they have more money than me. They can do this exact same thing with me than with you, even though I might have a little bigger portion than you right now.
Okay. So let me just ask you a point-blank question. Do you think that the land rights in this country are equitable across the board? So if you were to wake up tomorrow as a black man, would you be comfortable with the way the laws are?
You can't trust the ANC government whenever they tell you, I promise you, we will not come and take your land one day. Okay. They have proven beyond a shadow of doubt over the years they can't be trusted.
All right. Let me come back to Una here because he's referring to the ANC government, which you're not a part of. You're part of the MK Youth League. But the challenges he's describing are similar to what Komotso is describing. So is it a governance issue or is it a land issue?
Well, it's both a government issue and a systematic issue. Like Komotso mentioned, that there are monopolies out there. It's not easy to enter into the markets. You might be given the land and you don't have resources, one. Or if you are lucky to have resources to plow and do all those activities, you won't be able to get the market out there because there are monopolies which are gatekeeping the market for certain people. And those monopolies...
Tavi is nodding. You agree?
I'm agreeing with
okay.
that. But it's not just for black against black people. It's also for small-scale white farmers. The big guys are trying to keep the small guys out.
No, that's incorrect. Most black people live in here, in Gauteng province. Most black people, they are selling in townships. they are selling in Soweto, they are selling in Alexandra, all those cheap houses. But the people who are actually selling big houses and making serious monies, they are selling in Sandton. And even sometimes when a black estate agent comes wanting to sell somebody's land, and that person you find is a white person, they don't trust the black person. They don't give them the opportunity to sell their land until a white man arrives, and then they start giving them what they call this permission to actually advertise and sell their property.
Okay.
So racism is something that we must not sugarcoat. We must agree that racism continues to exist in the property sector as a large, whether as a whole, whether it's in farming, whether it's in estate agent, whether it's in mining, everywhere. Racism continues to exist, because what happened is that when we were given this freedom in 1994, we thought that we have achieved victory, but actually it was a strategic defeat, because what happened is that they just gave us a parliament that we are able to sit there and go to the same toilet with the white person. But in actual reality, in terms of the system and how the operations of the economy run, they made sure that they will actually keep us until and we will continue to work for them until we die. A black person is born working for a white person until they die.
All right, but Guguletu here is not working for a white person. You're working for yourself. So as a young, born-free... As a young, born-free who's trying to empower yourself in this sector, do these realities, are they real for you? Is this what you're going through?
Yes, 100%. I think I always tell my mom that it is so unfair how the amount of work that I believe that we put in here at the farm is never going to match what is out there at the moment. However, any money that we make goes back to the land. You know, we might own the land, but we still have to pay for the land. And if it comes either the land and, you know, the people, the workers, that they're still being small farmers trying to break and penetrate into a very big market is very, very tough and very difficult for us. And I think it can be very discouraging knowing how this is something that is not very open to everyone, and a lot of us are not very exposed to what is out there. Our knowledge on agriculture as the youth is very, very limited.
Okay, so for you, you see this as a way to level the playing field, to create that equity.